Hey guys, this video is going to be a quick demo of two of the websites that I built for a subject called Internet Programming that I did in 2021 when I was in uni. And here's what the two websites look like. The first one is a grocery store, and the requirement was to have an hierarchical structure of all the items on the left hand side, and then when you click on one of the items it will show up on the top right hand corner, where you could also adjust the amount, and then you can add to cart and then check out, and just basically the usual stuff. And then the second website is a car rental service website, quite similar to the first one. You could add something to a cart, and then in the cart you could adjust how many rental days you want, and then finally you could check out or you could delete the cart and stuff like that. And first, let's take a look at the requirements. Here's the assignment brief for the first one. As you can probably tell, MySQL is part of the requirement. When I was doing it, we had to write all the SQL code and then put everything in the database. But I believe for this year, they actually provided the .sql file that will generate everything in here. So I believe the subject has gotten a bit nicer. Something to note is that both of these websites are written in plain PHP and also vanilla JavaScript and pure CSS. And this is actually required. So basically we were not allowed to use something like React, but we were allowed to use something like jQuery because they really want to make sure that you understand the vanilla JavaScript first. And here's the main requirements. First of all, as I've explained before, the layout is something like this. There is a left-hand side, and then top right-hand side, and then bottom right-hand side. That makes up the entire website UI. And then down here is a detailed explanation. The left-hand side is an visual browser, and the technique that they used as an example was an image map, which I believe is kind of a legacy technology. But the main thing is this. The left-hand side should show, the grocery store, and then all the biggest subsections here, frozen food, fresh foods, stuff like that. And when you mouse over one of the sections, all the stuff down here should appear. And then at the lowest level of the hierarchy, which is the individual items, when you click on it, they should actually open up a PHP file in the top right hand frame, which is the product info. It's also generated by PHP, and then it should display the attributes of the product retrieved from MySQL. It is also required to have an add button, which will send the information to a shopping cart displayed at the bottom right hand frame. And we should include a clear button and a checkout button. When the checkout button is clicked, there should be like a different stage that does not allow additional items to be added to the cart. And then basically on the top right hand frame, it's not going to show the single product information anymore. It's going to show a summary of all the products. And then at the bottom right hand corner, which used to be the shopping cart frame, it is going to display a purchase form, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then down at the bottom, they actually provided some of the images that could be used if you wish, which I believe does not look that visually appealing, but essentially it contains the categories, the top level hierarchies, and then all the lower levels, including the individual items. And one of the examples that they suggested was to use image map in combination with all these images that were provided to create this sort of like interactive navigation. For this assignment, I started with actually designing it in Illustrator. I couldn't find what I started with, but this was part of the journey. So this version is me designing what I wanted for the product information page to look like, because I wanted it to be more interesting. And here was one of the demos that I did at that stage. And I actually sent this to my tutor to make sure that I was on the right track. And essentially he said, yep, you can go ahead and implement. And from here, it is pretty obvious that for the two frames that are on the right hand side, I actually used two iframes. And then basically when you click on the product, the iframe here would actually receive through a GET request that would basically tell it to retrieve the information of a certain product. For the main layout, I believe this is actually pretty simple. So for the left hand side, each of the elements will occupy like 15% of the view height. And then this will be another 10% of the view height. And then the rest of the stuff would just be for the image map to achieve this effect of hovering and then changing the category functionality, all of the elements had a on mouse over event that would do two things. First of all, it would add an ID to the hovered list element, and then that would basically modify the width to be a bit larger than the ones that were not selected, and then change the background color to white to make it stand out. To make this nice transition animation, it is actually pretty simple. It's pure CSS. So I just added a transition property to the list item, to each of the list items, so that when any of the property changes, it will automatically animate and morph to the next position. And then for the stuff down here, it is actually composed of the image that has no interactiveness, and then on the top of it is an SVG that includes a couple of rectangles that when you hover it is gonna light up, and then it also had an on-click event that would sort of open up certain product info on the top right hand corner. Basically, I sketch out everything that is going to be displayed in this section, and you can probably see that here. If I add a background and let's make it a different color, we can actually see that this is the PNG that was generated. And then down here, I exported each one of those to an SVG, and then all of these rectangles would be clickable elements in the HTML. I believe you could also do this in something like Figma, export the SVG that way as well. Comparing to an image map, I believe this method is a lot more direct and easier to design. So here is the end result. First of all, I click on one of the items in here, for example, fish food, and then maybe I just want one, and then I can just add to cart. It is going to show up in the shopping cart down below, and then in the product page, it is actually going to show some extra information about the item, if it's in the cart or not. We also needed to implement a limit to how many of those items can we add. For example, if we add like 19 more to the cart, we can actually see that we could only add like 20 to the cart. If we go to a new item, we also needed to check if the user entered something like 21, and then we'll have something to notify them. Some other format checks includes if this number is a negative number or a zero, or if the number is not a whole number, and basically making sure that the number is a valid number. Let's add a bit more to the cart, and then we can click checkout. In this case, the top right hand corner is going to show a cart summary of all the items in the cart and then a total price. The bottom right hand corner is going to show, as per requirements, a checkout form that includes a name, address, suburb, email, stuff like that. Another requirement was that when we are in a checkout mode, the user cannot add any other items to the shopping cart. And for me, that is done through basically a Boolean value in the session or in the cookie that basically checks if the user is actually in checkout mode. The top right hand corner is not going to show any additional information about the product, and then you need to go back to the checkout or click on the back arrow and then go back to shopping mode. And then something else that we needed to check for was when we click on clear, if there's nothing in the cart and we click on checkout, it is actually going to prompt user something. We'll now add something to the cart. When we click on checkout, we're taken to this checkout form. As expected, we need to check stuff. This is done through JavaScript, but I believe you could also do this with pure HTML just inside the input tag. I'm just going to quickly go through the input process. And then we can click on purchase, and then finally this page is going to show your order is now complete. A confirmation has been sent to an email address, and that is basically it for the first website. Moving on to the second one, this one is a car rental system that focuses on Ajax. So basically all the data of car information is loaded using Ajax through like a JSON file, similar to what you would get through an API. Basically, you parse the information in the JSON and then display it in the browser. For this one, there wasn't much restrictions on how the website should display content. Basically, the website should have a few pages. The first one should be a display of all the cars, and then each one of those should have an add button to add to the cart. And then this is also done through Ajax. The JavaScript would need to check if the car is available. Then we move on to the second page, which is going to show the thumbnail of the car, the name of the vehicle, the price, how many days, and then you could delete the car or proceed to checkout. finally, there will be a checkout page that is pretty similar to the first one. You need the user's first name, last name, email address, stuff like that. For this one, I also started with designing in Illustrator. So here is a rough sketch of what I started with. For the homepage, it's going to show all of the cards, and each of them will be in a type of card. For the shopping cart page, basically I wanted this page to convey more information and show more relationship between all those numbers. The column headers actually include some additional information. For example, the daily price times the rental days is going to be the total price. And for this design, I made it so that the daily price is going to be fixed and not editable, but the rental days is going to be editable, and that will lead to a calculated total price and then a total price down here. And then I continue to design the checkout form, which is going to look like this. It is basically a nicer version of the form that will sort of group together similar type of information, like the first name, last name, and email. And then finally, I designed a page that looks like this, which is going to be a confirmation page, and is also going to show you a summary of what the user bought and like their information. Going to the final product, this is how it looks like. The page actually has 3 columns, and then the cards would stack on one another nicely. The way that I achieved it was actually to separate all of those into 3 separate vertical containers, and then each of them would have a card block. And while reading card information from JSON, it will sort of make sure that the card 1 goes to the first container, and then card 2 goes to the second one, card 3 goes to the third one, card 4 go back to the first one. For some of the cards, the availability is going to be true. For the others, it's going to be false. For the ones that are not available, when hovered, the button will turn red, and that is obviously done through CSS. And then for the cards that are available, when you hover it, it's going to indicate that this is clickable. And then when you click on it, it's going to send a request through Ajax. And then when it's added successfully, it's going to pop up a notification. And then stuff will be changed accordingly. We can also add multiple stuff to the cards, but when we click on the cards that are not available, it's going to show a warning sign like this. Moving on to the cards, we can see all the information of the cards that we just added. I achieved this by treating this as an entire block. Similar stuff for each of the card items. The big chunk is treated as a whole to make sure that each one of those names or the images or the prices appear at the correct location. The display grid property was used for the parent elements. The entire width is actually separated into different sections by proportion, and similar stuff for this one. I also used a display grid, and then inside there is another grid that nicely separates all the sections for the information. To continue the demo, when we change the rental days, again, this is checked with JavaScript. So on input change, the input is actually checked. So for instance, if I put 0 days, that item would actually be removed. If I put something like -1, it checks and knows that it's not a positive number. If I input something like 1.5, it actually says we only accept whole days. If I input something normal like 5, then the total number will be calculated. And then if I change this will also update, and then the total will be updated at the bottom. When I press checkout, we go to the third page, and this is pretty close to what I designed before. And I'm going to run through this, and clearly all of this needs to be format checked. So basically all of these cannot be empty. If it's empty, it's going to show something is wrong or something is missing. I'm going to run through this, and finally I'll press checkout. Finally, we have this confirmation page that includes a big tick, and then thank you, your details have been confirmed, and then a summary of your order, which includes the total price and everything that was in your cart. And then here is your personal information. I inputted a couple of ones in the previous screen, but if it was actual information, it will be displayed down here. And that was pretty much it. A quick run through of the 2 websites that I built for the subject internet programming. Thanks for watching.